Okay, let's get into this. We're looking at a really intense period in French history back in the 16th century when France was, well, it was basically tearing itself apart.
It really was. We're talking about 30 years of civil war, the French Wars of Religion. And it all started with some really fundamental arguments over faith.
So our goal here is to unpack all of that. We need to figure out who the main players were, these people called the Huguenots, and why their beliefs were seen as such a threat.
Exactly, a threat to the whole kingdom. And then, importantly, how France eventually, painfully found a way to stop the fighting and start to rebuild.
Let's start right there then. Who exactly were the Huguenots? What made their beliefs so dangerous to the people in charge?
So the Huguenots, to put it simply, were French Protestants. They were part of that huge religious shift happening all over Europe, the Reformation, and they specifically followed the teachings of a guy named John Calvin.
And Calvinism had one core idea that was a really big problem for the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah.
A huge problem. They believe the Bible. And only the Bible should be the final word on a religion, not church traditions, not the Pope.
Which isn't just an argument about books. That's a direct challenge to power. The Church and the King of France had been a team for, what, centuries?
Precisely. If you say the Pope and the bishops don't have the ultimate authority, you're also questioning the authority of the king, who is said to be chosen by God. You're shaking the whole political system.
And this new faith caught on really fast.
Incredibly fast. And not just with, poor farmers. It was the middle class, merchants, thinkers, and this is the key part, some very powerful noble families.
Okay, so why the nobility? Was it a genuine change of heart, or was there some politics involved?
It was definitely a mix. For some, it was absolutely a deep personal faith, but for others, it was also a huge opportunity.
An opportunity to do what?
To push back against the king.
Yeah.
The French monarchy was trying to centralize all the power in Paris. And Protestantism gave these regional nobles a powerful reason, a religious reason, to rally people against him.
So the king wants one country, one faith, one king. And they're saying, not so fast.
You got it. At first, the king, Francis I, was sort of tolerant. But as the Huguenots grew in number and got these powerful allies, the government's view changed. They went from a nuisance to a major threat to the unity of the country, and that's when the real persecution started.
Which brings us to this idea of a nation just split right down the middle. You've got the huge Catholic majority backed by the king against this growing and very motivated Protestant minority.
And you need to understand, by the 1550s, this wasn't something you could solve with a debate. The fight over religion got tangled up with fights over who controlled what town, who owned what land.
So a local argument over taxes could suddenly become a Catholic versus Protestant fight to the death.
That's it exactly. The whole country was just filled with suspicion. Families were split apart. We have letters, that talk about a father and son on opposite sides. It got so bad that people started carrying weapons everywhere because you never knew when a simple argument could turn violent.
The whole society was a powder keg, just waiting for a spark. And there were powerful people ready to light the match.
Absolutely. On the Catholic side, you had the Guise family. They were incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, and they set themselves up as the defenders of the true faith. They practically had their own army.
And they were challenging the king's authority, too, weren't they?
Constantly, which was easy to do because at this critical moment, the central government was actually pretty weak.
Why was that?
The king, Charles IX, was just a boy. So the real power was with his mother, Catherine de' Medici. She was Italian, a foreigner, so a lot of people didn't trust her. And she was stuck in this impossible situation, trying to balance the extreme Catholic Guise family on one side and the powerful Huguenot nobles on the other.
She's just trying to keep the country from falling apart, and these other families are using the chaos to grab more power for themselves.
That's the story of the next 30 years. The moment the king looked weak, these big families use religion as an excuse to raise their own armies, ignore royal laws, and stop paying taxes. That's why the wars just dragged on and on.
And then came the spark, the event that turned all this tension into an actual full-scale war, 1562.
The Massacre of Wassy. In a town called Wassy, a top Catholic noble, probably connected to that Guise family we mentioned, he and his soldiers stumbled upon a group of Huguenots. They were holding a church service in a barn.
Which was forbidden.
It was, and tensions just exploded. The soldiers attacked the worshippers. They were unarmed.
And the result?
Dozens of Huguenots were killed, and more than 100 were wounded. And that was it. That was the point of no return. For the Huguenot nobles, this was a declaration of war. Within weeks, both sides had their armies in the field, and the French Wars of Religion had officially begun.
And once it started, it just didn't stop for decades.
Yeah.
How did that affect regular people? You know, the farmers, the shopkeepers.
The suffering was just constant. The front line was everywhere. Armies were always on the move, marching through farmland, destroying crops. Both sides would burn down churches just to make a statement.
And just trying to move goods around must have been impossible.
Extremely dangerous. Roads were blocked by bandits or soldiers. So trade between cities just stopped, which meant food shortages became really common. The price of bread would skyrocket, and both armies would just take what they needed from the peasants by force. So for you, as an average person, it was just 3 decades of trying to survive.
On top of that, you had other countries getting involved.
Oh yeah, this wasn't just a French fight. Catholic Spain was sending money and troops to help the Catholic League. And then Protestant England, under Queen Elizabeth I, would sometimes send money to help the Huguenots, mostly because it was a good way to weaken France.
So you have a weak king, a mother trying to hold it all together, powerful families stirring the pot, and foreign money pouring in. It's a recipe for disaster.
An absolute disaster. And it all comes to a head in 1572 with the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, which is so horrific because it was supposed to be a moment of peace.
Right, this is all centered around a wedding.
A huge royal wedding in Paris.
Yeah.
The Huguenot prince, Henry of Navarre, was marrying the king's sister, a Catholic princess. The idea was to unite the two sides. Hundreds of the most important Huguenot leaders came to Paris for the celebration.
Just something went wrong.
Terribly wrong. Just after the wedding, there was an assassination attempt on the top Huguenot military leader, a man named Admiral Coligny. He was only wounded, but the Huguenots were furious. They demanded an investigation.
And Catherine de' Medici, she panicked.
She panicked. She was afraid the Huguenots would start a war right there in Paris. Under huge pressure from the Guise faction, she made a terrible, fatal choice.
Yeah.
She approved the plan to eliminate the Huguenot leadership in one swift strike.
But it wasn't a swift surgical strike, was it?
Not at all. It started that way. On the night of August 24th, the hit squads went out, and they killed Coligny and the other leaders. But then the violence it exploded. It spilled into the streets.
And it wasn't just soldiers anymore.
No. Mobs of citizens started hunting down any Huguenot they could find. Men, women, children. Thousands were murdered in Paris. Maybe 3,000. And then the violence spread like a fire to other cities across France.
How do you even begin to explain that to the rest of the world?
You can't. At first, the royal family tried to say it was just, a feud between the Guise and Coligny families that got out of hand. Nobody bought it. So they changed their story and said they'd uncovered a Huguenot plot to kill the king, and the massacre was self-defense.
And the reaction from other countries?
Horror. Even other Catholic kings were shocked by the brutality. For the Huguenots who survived, it was a clear message. You can never, ever trust the king.
So this didn't end the war.
It made it so much worse. Any hope for a peaceful compromise was gone. The surviving Huguenots retreated to their strongholds in the south and west of France and prepared to fight to the end.
So years pass, kings come and go, and then a new figure rises up, someone who seems like he might actually be able to fix this mess. Henry of Navarre.
The very same prince from that wedding. He was a Huguenot, a great military leader, he was charming, and most importantly, he had a direct, legitimate claim to be the next king of France.
But he had one massive problem. He was Protestant.
Right. So when he becomes King Henry IV in 1589, the Catholic League and most of Paris refused to accept him. He's the king, but he can't even enter his own capital city. He had to fight for years just to rule his own country.
And this leads to one of the most practical and maybe cynical political decisions in history.
It does. After years of fighting, Henry realized he was stuck. A Protestant king was never going to be accepted by the Catholic majority. He couldn't win. So in 1593, he made a choice.
He converted to Catholicism.
He did. He publicly converted. And that's where we get the famous line, Paris is worth a mass. He was basically saying that uniting France was more important than his personal faith.
And what did that do to his enemies, the Catholic League? Their whole reason for fighting was that he was a Protestant.
It completely pulled the rug out from under them. Some of the extremists kept fighting, but most of France was just exhausted by war. They were relieved. The king was a Catholic now, so the main reason for the war was gone. Soon after, he marched into Paris.
Which finally allows him to create the Edict of Nantes in 1598. This is the big peace treaty. What did it actually do for the Huguenots?
The edict was revolutionary for its time. It gave the Huguenots the right to practice their religion in certain towns. It gave them full civil rights. They could go to university, hold government jobs, everything that had been forbidden before.
But there was another part that was even more radical, wasn't there? Something about security.
Yes, and this was the key to making it work. Henry allowed the Huguenots to keep control of about 100 fortified towns with their own soldiers and their own defenses. He was creating a kind of state within a state.
That's a huge risk.
It was. But he knew that after the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the Huguenots would never accept peace unless they had the power to protect themselves. And it worked. The Edict of Nantes finally ended the civil wars.
And with peace, Henry could focus on rebuilding the country.
His focus was all practical. Fix the roads and bridges to get trade moving again, lower taxes on farmers so they could start growing food. He had that famous goal, that he wanted every peasant to be able to afford a chicken in every pot on Sundays.
He understood that people needed to feel secure economically for the peace to last.
Exactly. And the Huguenots were actually a huge part of that recovery. Their culture valued hard work, education, and thrift. Many of them were skilled craftsmen, weavers, bankers. Once things were safe again, they poured all that energy back into the French economy and the country started to boom.
So looking back, what's the long-term legacy here?
Well, for a while, the Huguenots had an influence that was much bigger than their numbers. They showed that, a country could have religious diversity and still be successful.
But that tolerance didn't last forever.
It didn't. Later on, King Louis XIV, the Sun King, wanted absolute power. And he saw the Huguenots and their fortified towns as a challenge to his total control. So he started taking away their rights bit by bit until he finally revoked the Edict of Nantes completely in 1685.
Which led to another wave of persecution.
A massive one. Hundreds of thousands of Huguenots were forced to either convert or flee France. And they took their skills with them. To the American colonies, to South Africa, to England. It was a huge brain drain for France.
So in the end, these wars taught a really brutal but important lesson.
A very clear one. It showed how incredibly dangerous things get when you mix religious belief with political power struggles. And the solution, the Edict of Nantes, it set an early example that tolerance, even if it's not perfect, is a much better tool for building a stable country than endless war.
And maybe the thought to leave you with is this. Henry IV traded his personal faith to bring peace to his country. Which really makes you wonder, what is peace worth? Is it worth giving up a core principle, especially when that principle is shared by thousands of your people?
It's a question they wrestled with for centuries after that.
It is. We'll see you next time.